Well, our next speaker is a familiar face and a Cannon Falls native. He's been very involved in the community, very involved in athletics and baseball, and now owns and operates his own financial services business here in Cannon Falls. And looking forward to his story today. Would you please welcome Mr. Keith Meyers?
Well, thank you. I'm gonna move this out of the way because I like to move around. So, well, first of all, thanks the Shepherd Center for having me in. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Jesus Christ for the opportunity today. I think it's kind of cool that we're in the church and He's over my right shoulder. I hope that He gives me the strength to stand up here and tell my story, and hopefully you enjoy it too. So, I'll just get started. I was born in 1979. In Hastings, Minnesota, and it's kind of amazing that my baseball card says Hastings, Minnesota, not Cannon Falls, because they go by where you were born, not where you grew up. So I wish it would say Cannon Falls, to tell you the truth. My parents, Rick and Lola Meyers. Rick is the custodian at the elementary school now. He's been there. He's been in the school system since about 91, 92. So you may have seen him around when your kids were growing up. My mom has run an in-home daycare on the west side of town for a long time. That woman has more patience than I can imagine. My grandparents were Jack and Ruth Meyers. They ran the Meyers Mini Market on the north side of town back in the late 70s and early 80s. My other and they both passed away. My other grandparents are Jim and Marlene Saski, CysieWski. Spelt a little different than it's pronounced. And they still are living, and my grandpa's birthday is next week. He's 85. And they live in Vermilion, just north of here. So, and they're still healthy, so it's fun to see them. My father grew up in a household of 9 kids, and Kay is here. She's married to the oldest, Nick. So Mike is my uncle. He runs Napa. And you probably know some of the siblings. Jackie Van Gilder would be my aunt there. My mother grew up in a household of 10, so I have a lot of first cousins. Most of those cousins live between Cannon Falls and Rosemount, so we have a big family that's in the area. I haven't counted my number of first cousins in a long time. I know the youngest, I think, is a freshman in high school now, so they're spread out pretty far, and obviously the relationship with them is much different than the ones that grew up with me when we used to run around Grandma's house. So my grandmother, Marlene, who's still alive, God bless her soul, she had 10 kids in a 12-year span. So she had 3 boys born August. So she's a patient woman. I asked her one time, I said, when did you decide you wanted to have 10 kids? She said, I was done after 2. My priest wouldn't let me have any birth control. So it's funny, she... one of my uncles passed away here this December, and the priest asked her, because all of my mom's side, all of the girls are named, starts with an L. Lori, Linda, Lola, Lynette, Lisa, Leanne. And the priest asked her, why did you go with an L? And she said, they each stood for last. So for all those children, she had a good sense of humor. So anyway, I grew up in Cannon Falls. The first house I lived in was on 100 East Minnesota Street, right by the old elementary school, back when it was an elementary school. Now it's the Shepherd Center, right? Then when I was in first grade, we moved to the west side of town, up on 700 West Minnesota Street, and on the dead end up there, just above the hockey rink. So that was when the Semstone plant was still in town, and before it became condos. So I remember jumping in the gravel pit and screwing around, shooting woodchucks down there. That was kind of a good time. So growing up for me, I'm the oldest of 4. So my brother is 18 months younger than me. He was just hired as the head football coach here in town, Dan Meyers. My sister Melissa was 4 years younger than me. She lives in Rosemount, has 2 kids of her own, and she works for a large company called Accenture. And then my youngest sister, Sarah, is 13 years younger than me. She married a Navy man from town, and they live down in Biloxi where he's stationed now. So I I think being the oldest of four really certainly, when I was young, helped me with leadership, helped me become the leader I feel that I am today, hopefully for my own family too. And I feel blessed to be the oldest, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, but good overall. So in 5th grade was the first year of the new elementary school. Mrs. Johnson probably remembers that. So I was in the new elementary school for 2 years, and then moved on to the high school. You know, my growing up in Cannon Falls, I remember a lot of sports, maybe because that's where my mind was focused. We were in a neighborhood of kids, so there was a lot of kids my age that we played ball. We played wiffle ball in the backyard. My mom, being in the daycare industry, had a lot of kids at our house, so we would get all those kids and make them play baseball with us in the backyard, do home run derbies and all those different things. In the wintertime, just growing up from the hockey rink, we played hockey all the time. We went down there and skated from morning till dinner, and then we went back down after dinner, which was just a blast. You know, help break up that long winter that we can always, especially right now. Hopefully, we see that snow go away here in the next few days. But sometimes the winters get long, and having that activity is fun. So that was really my growing up. I wasn't particularly interested in school, I guess. I carried a decent average because I was smart enough to carry a decent average. My focus was kind of hanging out and having a social life and having fun and playing ball and doing those things. As I moved into junior high, my junior high football coach is sitting back there, Mike Dalton, right? I think he was a 7th grade coach. So growing up in Cannon Falls, we had a youth hockey league back then, a team. So I played hockey in 3rd grade, 5th grade, 7th grade, and 9th grade. The reason I skipped every year is because there was 3 kids my age that played, and there was about a dozen the grade below. In hockey, you play in 2-year increments at each level, and then you move up. So we had to wait for those kids to get older so we could start a new team to play again. So in 7th grade, we started our hockey season while our football season was still going on. And I wasn't the starting quarterback that I remember anyway. Maybe you remember more about that than I. I wasn't good enough, that's true. And I hadn't quite hit that puberty yet. And both of our quarterbacks went down. Aaron Winchell went down with a separated shoulder. And I don't remember what happened to Dustin. But Mike came to the back of the bus and he said, "Keith, I know you start hockey this weekend, but you're the last quarterback we have. You have to stay healthy." So that started my quarterback career right there, trying to stay healthy through hockey. So then in 8th grade, actually I think Aaron and Dustin both moved on. They didn't play football anymore. And I had not quite hit puberty yet that 7th grade year. So the 8th graders were kind of ruthless, and they would just make fun of me all the time because my voice sounded like, "Down, set, hike, hike, hike." And I remember kind of thinking I had a chip on my shoulder that I'm going to show these guys. I'm going to show these guys that I'm better than them, and hopefully, you know, I stuck it to them a little bit after that. And then 8th grade, started playing, quarterback and doing those things. Played baseball all the way through. I was telling Mike, we had 29 kids on our 7th grade baseball team, and I think our class size we graduated 124. So we had 29 boys that played junior high baseball in 7th grade. We were coached by Jarlie Norstead and Doug Retzikel. And a lot of those guys didn't play throughout, but I think that's one of the things a small town offers is the ability to play sports even when you're not the star athlete. To be part of something, a team, and the social aspect of that is fun. So as I moved into junior high, looking back, my freshman year, Dennis Flum was the baseball coach, and he invited me and another one of my friends to practice with the varsity right away in the spring. And I thought, I'd never been brought up before. I'd always been, maybe middle to upper of the pack, a little above average baseball player. But I just kind of thought they needed some bodies to throw some innings in the spring. So I think I had a pretty decent camp, and then I was named as part of the varsity that year as a freshman, and it really surprised me. Although I always thought I could throw the ball a little bit, I never really thought that I would advance and play at the varsity level that early. that was a year, as my freshman year, Tony Holmes was a senior, Mitch Banks was a senior, John Sheeby would be names that you might all remember. And we had a pretty good year. We ended up winning the HVL conference, and we won the sub section and moved on to sections. So as a freshman, I think I had 7 wins and had a pretty under 1 ERA. So I contributed to that, although I didn't throw real hard. That was kind of when it kind of opened my eyes. Hey, maybe baseball is a thing that I love to do, and I'm passionate about. In 8th grade, I had wrestled. I was a wrestler. My dad was a wrestler, and in 8th grade, you know, you're not real physically put together. Most 8th graders aren't. And I was wrestling JV, and I was wrestling against a kid from Hastings, and he was a junior, and he absolutely manhandled me. I mean, he had man muscles, and he flexed them. And I got hurt. I hurt my shoulder, and I remember, you know, going to my dad and saying, "Dad, I enjoy wrestling. However, I like baseball a heck of a lot more. If I'm going to hurt my shoulder wrestling, I'm not going to be able to throw the ball." And, you know, I was kind of anxious about that conversation because my dad loved wrestling. But, you know, he looked at me and he said, "Hey, that's fine. If you don't enjoy it, you don't have to do that because of me." And, but he said, "You're not going to sit on your butt." So in my freshman year, I actually played hockey over in Northfield and did some weightlifting with Scott Safe in the weight room, who, if anybody's ever seen Scott in the morning, I call him the Pied Piper of weightlifting. I mean, if he's there, people are going to follow because he's just an amazing attitude from morning till, I'm sure, till he goes to bed. I've never asked Brenda if he's still that hyper at 8 o'clock at night, but I bet he is. And he's been such a blessing for our community in that weight program. For a few years when he wasn't running the program, I would get in the weight room from time to time, and there were days it was just me and one kid, Bucky Lindo's boy Braxton, that weightlifting in the morning. Within 2 months of Scott starting that program back up, there was 40 or 50 kids. So he is quite a leader and really gifted in that respect. So that was 9th grade. Good freshman year. My 9th grade summer might have been the funnest summer of my life. I was able to play on 3 baseball teams. I played on the Senior Babe Ruth, which we called midgets back then. That's not politically correct anymore, but Senior Babe Ruth, which were 8th and 9th graders. I played on the VFW team, which was made up of 8th, 9th, and 10th graders, and then I played on the Legion team. So there were days, I didn't have my driver's license yet, so there were days I'd get up and I'd ride my bike down to the ballpark or walk and get on the bus at 10 in the morning, and the bus would drop me back off at John Birch Park after the game, and I'd play a Legion game that night. So in the Senior Babe Ruth, there were double headers, so we'd play 2 games, and then I'd get to play a 3rd game on Mondays and Thursdays almost every day of the week. So, which was awesome. I loved it. I loved every minute of it, and I skipped a lot of family vacations to do that. And looking back, maybe I should have went on a couple more, but that was the passion that I had, and I loved that part of baseball. So that freshman year, we actually we were terrible. I mean, we had kids from Randolph because Randolph did not have a Legion team at that time. We had kids from Goodhue because Goodhue didn't have a team that year. Legion team at that time. So there were probably 3 kids from Randolph, 4 kids from Goodhue, and the rest of us were Cannon Falls kids. And I think we won like 3 games all year. But because we hosted the district tournament, we got an automatic bid into that tournament, and we ran the table. And we ended up taking 2nd in state once playoffs started. So it was kind of a magical, it was a real life story of the Bad News Bears. And we ended up losing to, I think, La Crescent in the state title game, and it was hosted in Northfield that year, which was a lot of fun. I had pitched that Saturday and that Sunday of that weekend, which doesn't happen anymore, but it happened back then. And that Monday we started football practice. And being a quarterback and just throwing 2 days in a row, it doesn't really go well with your arm feeling well. So I was in the hunt for the starting quarterback position. I told my coach, I said, "Coach, I can't throw. I mean, I couldn't lift my arm." And he said, "Well, you still got to throw. You got to throw." So I finished that day out, and then I was sick for the next 2 days to let my arm rest. Looking back, that cost me the starting quarterback spot to start off my sophomore year, but it was probably the right decision because if I would have continued that way, I probably never would have been able to throw a football into October. So about midway through that year is when I took over as a varsity quarterback, and we were terrible. We were 0-8. We competed in maybe 2 of the 8 games. At that point, you weren't able to make playoffs. Not everybody made playoffs. Today, everybody does. But I think it was a good experience in the fact that, I don't know if anybody knows Jarlie Norstead, but his son Matt I grew up with. Jarlie is a competitor. Matt is that same competitor. And Matt and I were 2 sophomores that played on that team. And after our last loss, we pulled each other aside and we said, we're not going to let this happen to us. We're going to make sure that we don't go 0-8 our senior year. We're going to do everything we can to be successful. And from there, I mean, and not that we didn't, we had a great core group of guys anyway. We all hit the weight room. We all dedicated that to each other, to work hard, to get better for each other. And we, by the time we were seniors, it played out pretty well. So my sophomore, junior year, nothing special. I think we won we won the HVL in baseball both years. We never really made it to state. Never could get over that hump. Football, same thing. I think we went 4-5. My junior year of football was an interesting year. We threw the ball a lot, had a lot of passing yards, but I was getting stingers. So in football, if you've ever seen that or heard about it, it's when your neck jostles back and your arm goes numb for a while. So I had got a series of stingers my junior year, and finally we were playing Casson down there the last game of the year, and I got one that lasted about a half an hour where I couldn't feel my arm, and I tried to throw and I couldn't throw. So I finally decided to go to Mayo and have them do a MRI, and they found that the nerve in my neck was inflamed, and that if I were to take a couple more hits, I could sever that nerve and lose all feeling in my arm. So they told me that I'd never play football again. They told me certainly not this year and probably not ever again. So that was kind of a tough pill to swallow. I wasn't able to play that playoff game. We lost to New Richland, Heartland, Ellendale, Geneva, a team that we probably should have beat. And if we would have beat them, we would have matched up against Triton, who ended up winning the state that year, and they probably had one of the best teams of all time back in 1995. So had to sit out. It's hard to watch your teammates compete when you're not able to. So that winter, I really dedicated myself to the weight room, and I dedicated, especially, was intentional about building up my neck muscles and hoping that I would never have to get another stinger again. That next year in football, I didn't go back to the doctor and ask him if I could play football. I just played, which is probably a poor decision, but we're all there at one point in our life. And to this day, I have not ever had a stinger. So that dedication to the weight room and the ability to build those neck muscles certainly helped me in there. Now, the last year, I've had some issues with my arm and some numbness in my arm. So I think there might be some arthritis in the neck there from that trauma. But I guess I'll have to learn to deal with that, like we all deal with aches and pains every day. So my senior year was a pretty special year. It was that summer we went to state in Legion baseball again. Going into my senior year, we ended up taking second in state. We lost to Big Lake. So same song and dance from my freshman year. I learned a little bit from that, and I walked into football camp the next day, and I told my coach, hey, I need a week off. By this time, I had established myself enough where he listened and allowed me to take a week off of throwing so that my arm could be strong going into the football season. We had a pretty magical year. We ended up going 7-1 that year. My senior year, we won the HVL conference. We beat Waterville, Montgomery, Lonsdale, and Janesville in the playoffs. So we were 10-1 going into state. We made the state tournament. Ended up losing in a heartbreaker to Benson. Some of you may have been at that game. We were up 21-7 at half. We were up 21-0. I threw an interception that they ran back 97 yards for a touchdown. That's the one that burns in my mind a little bit. So it was 21-7 at half, and they ended up beating us 24-21. Needless to say, it was still a great season. It was a heartbreaker. But the things that I remember the most about that isn't necessarily the wins and the losses, but it's the guys that you played with. It's the relationships that you built. And I really feel that's where sports should be, and I think maybe in this country we've lost that focus a little bit. that sports is about me or my kid or whatever it might be, but that's not what sports is about. Sports is about building relationships and being part of a team and working together towards something. So that's maybe the main things that I learned from that team was we had, I think, 18 or 19 seniors, some of which who were not great athletes, but they were just dedicated to each other. And we cared more about each other than we really cared about ourselves. And I think that's where great teams and maybe even a great town becomes, is when you care about as much about the person next to you as you care about yourself, great things can happen. So that really was that was a fun season. My senior year, I played hockey. We decided to start this club team called the I don't even know what our name was, Cannon Falls something, and we played South St. Paul and Hastings and Inver Grove Heights, and looking back, it was really, really a bad decision on my part because it was kind of a fighter league, and if I would have got hurt for baseball my senior year, I would have been pretty disappointed, but I didn't get hurt, thank God, and was able to play my senior year. Senior year of baseball, we really didn't have a great season. We didn't win the HVL title, which my first 3 years we did. And going into subsections, we were the number 2 seed. And then once playoffs came around, we started to hit our stride. We ended up taking second in the subsection, which still got us to the section tournament, and we ended up running the table. We beat Lourdes, we beat La Crescent, we beat Chatfield, and ended up making the state tournament for the first time in Cannon Falls baseball history. We beat Wadena Deer Creek the first game. We lost to a great Melrose team who I went to college with a few of the guys in the second game. And then we beat Brooklyn Center for a third place win. So it was, again, another great experience, and the memories that you make with the friends that you have there are really priceless. So then on to college, and when I was being recruited to play sports, really there was probably 3 or 4 colleges that came knocking on the door. Winona State to play baseball primarily and maybe play football. St. Olaf to play both baseball and football, and then in Augsburg to play both sports, and then Mankato State. When I started, it was Mankato State. By the time I graduated, it was Minnesota State Mankato. Winona intrigued me because I could maybe play at Division II both levels, but I thought 2 sports at Division II would be so difficult. So I really narrowed it down quickly to Augsburg or Mankato. And, you know, my dad's not one, if you know my dad's not one to sit down and just really give philosophical advice. He's just kind of, you know, you do what you do and I'll give you some advice along the way. We sat down, and Augsburg was after me pretty hard. Scott Vissendahl was their star receiver. He was from Randolph. I knew Visty from playing Legion ball. I could be a quarterback throwing the ball to one of the best receivers in college history, which was really intriguing. Or I could go to Mankato and play, just focus on baseball. And I remember my dad saying, you know, you can go to Augsburg, and you can go there, and you could probably start at quarterback, and you could probably start on the baseball team right away. It's not going to be much different than what you're doing right now. And that's fine. If you want to do that, that's great. If you want to go to Mankato, you're probably not going to start, certainly not your freshman year, but you'll probably grow more as a baseball player. And in the long run, do you want to play baseball or do you want to play football and baseball? And as soon as he said that, I knew what I wanted to do, and I wanted to become the best baseball player I could. So that's why I chose Mankato. My first declared major was law enforcement. I quickly changed to business after I got into my generals, and eventually settled on a finance degree and a personal finance emphasis. College was, you know, college baseball at a Division II level is year-round. I remember going there my freshman year. I roomed with Mitch Banks the first couple years of practice, or a couple weeks of practice, and we started baseball practice 2 weeks in the fall school started. So we were down there during Vikings training camp and practicing before the students even came into school. So it truly was a year-round sport at that point. My coach told me, Dean Boyer, who was kind of a legendary college coach in Minnesota, he told me if I would have tried to play football and baseball, I would have never made the team. He said, you impressed us so much in the fall that we couldn't help but not put you on the varsity team. So my freshman year, I was one of 2 players that dressed for varsity and played. I was a relief pitcher. throughout my college career. I loved coming in and throwing an inning or two. Some weekends I would throw, we usually had double headers on Friday and Saturday. Some weekends I would throw 3 of the 4 games in relief. Had the ability, my arm had the ability to come back and throw on short rest. So I loved coming in those pressure moments and doing that. My sophomore year, we graduated when I was a freshman, our team wasn't really great, but we had some leadership. My sophomore year, our team was pretty good. We had no leadership. So I was kind of from my sophomore year on, kind of the captain of the pitchers. So I would make sure that we got our work done. A lot of the kids hated me. The freshman, when I was a sophomore, one of the freshman guys 3 years later told me, "I thought you were the biggest jerk your sophomore year when you made us run all the time." He's like, "But now I know and I understand why you made us do it." So I kind of took that leadership role pretty early on in college as far as the baseball team goes. We had a great team. We ended up winning the NCC conference my sophomore, my junior, and my senior year. So we had some pretty good squads back then. Could never make it to the College World Series. There was 2 years we were 1 game away, but we ran into some pretty good teams down there. So since then, I graduated, went to play some Bears baseball. In 2001, I was playing with the Bears, and we were playing Hastings, and the Hastings coach said, "There is no reason why you should be playing in the Cannon Valley League." He said, I know somebody with the Saints, I'll get you a tryout. So maybe a week later, I went up and had a tryout with the Saints, and they signed me the next day. So I played the rest of that summer with the St. Paul Saints back in 2001. Didn't really get a lot of playing time. I think I maybe threw 13 innings that summer. Had a pretty decent ERA. Didn't strike out a lot of guys. But it was fun, and if anybody's ever been to a Saints game, you know how much fun they are. We got to do that every day and got to travel and see the Midwest. So that was a fun time. So 2001, that fall, I didn't expect to do much, maybe play with the Saints the next year. I started my full-time job my first day full-time was September 12th, 2001. So the day after 9/11 is when I started as a financial planner, financial advisor, which is kind of an interesting time to start in that industry. A couple weeks later, the local Dodger scout named Jerry Raditz from Winona called, and he said, "Hey Keith, we're gonna invite you down to minor league camp." And I was really surprised because I didn't light up the radar gun at the Saints facility, so I didn't really expect much more than another opportunity with the Saints. So he came up, we signed, it was in the Beacon even, there was a picture back in 2001. And then in March of 2002, I took a plane ride down to Vero Beach, my first plane ride down to Vero Beach, Florida, Orlando, and drove to Vero Beach, and went to Dodger spring training. And that was that was an unbelievable experience. In the weight room next to some major league guys, one of Adrian Beltre, who's still playing third base for the Rangers. He was a young ball player back then. Sandy Koufax was driving his convertible. He drove by, said hi one day. Maury Wills taught us how to steal bases. Brett Butler taught us how to bunt. Tommy Lasorda yelled at me in the cafeteria one day. From across the room, he yelled at me. The Saints hat, if you guys have ever seen a Saints hat, it's got the STP on it. Well, when I was with the Saints, we had a promotional, it was Charlie Brown game or something like that. I had a red Saints hat, and I was wearing it in the cafeteria. Looks very similar to a St. Louis Cardinals hat. So from across the cafeteria, he yelled at me to get that St. Louis Cardinals hat out of his bleeping cafeteria. And I explained to him that it was a St. Paul Saints hat, and he said, "Okay, kid. Independent ball, that's fine," and he went through the line at the cafeteria. So that's my Tommy Lasorda story. During that camp, I guess my eyes were really opened up to the ability of some athletes in this world, some things that you just can't teach. I was roommates with a man named Edwin Jackson, and at that time he was 19 years old. He was drafted as an outfielder the June before. One night he came in and he said, "I don't know why, but they're changing me to pitcher this year. I don't understand it. I was drafted as an outfielder. I didn't even pitch in high school. I don't know why they're making me a pitcher." And I asked him, I said, "Well, how hard do you throw?" He said 98 miles an hour. And I said, "Well, there's your answer, bud." And he had signed out of high school as an outfielder for $250,000. I had received a plane ticket and free food for a week or however long I was there. So my eyes were opened up to the ability of some people out there, and some things you just can't teach. We were doing a minor league symposium, and a man named Darren Dreifert was speaking. And Darren Dreifert was one of the most prolific college baseball pitchers there has ever been. He was a pitcher for Wichita State, and he had a lot of arm injuries in professionals. And he had Tommy John surgery the year before, and he was talking to the minor leaguers about things that you can do when you're rehabbing. And he mentioned going back to college to get your degree. And there was probably between 70 and 100 guys there, and he asked, how many people started college? And maybe, a dozen of us raised our hand, and they said, how many people have their degree? And I raised my hand, and from what I could see, I was the only one with my hand up. So it really opened my eyes, and I thank God that I had a backup plan to professional baseball, because that $700 monthly check really doesn't. I was very thankful that I was able to live at home when I was playing with the Saints and driving up there, because $700 doesn't go far if you have to pay rent, room and board somewhere. So about 25 days in, I had a decent camp. I wouldn't say I opened many eyes, but I got a lot of guys out, but it wasn't in the cards. So I was released. They sent me home, and I was really ready to just start life. And I always wanted to be part of the Cannon Falls community, and that allowed me to. I did sign with the Saints and played some spring training ball with them in 2002. But looking back, in all honesty, my heart really wasn't in it at that point. I wasn't willing to grind out 8 or 9 years in the minor leagues to maybe get a shot at the major leagues. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. And it's a hard life, traveling the country, not making much money. So I was ready to start my career, and I knew I could still play baseball. We're in the state of Minnesota amateur baseball, the Miesville Mud Hens, the Red Wing Aces, the Dundas Dukes, the Cannon Falls Bears. It's something that most of the rest of the country does not have. So I knew I could come back to Cannon Falls and play 3 days a week with guys that I know, guys that I love, and scratch that baseball itch and still be able to contribute to my community and start a career, start a family, and grow through life. So that was my decision, and I've been happy with it. I married a Cannon Falls gal, Tammy Elias. Her grandparents are Jim and Arletta Soul and Les Elias, so you might know those names. Her father runs the electric motor shop down by the Catholic Church. So we're blessed to have family around us. We're blessed to be part of the community, and we're certainly excited to have our kids grow up here. My daughter is in 6th grade. My son, Jack, is in 4th grade. My daughter's name is Abby. And then my son, Tyler, is in 2nd grade. So that's really all I have. If you guys have any questions for me. Rod.
Looking back on your athletic career, what to you was the most fun? Was it high school? Was it college? Or was it after college where you just enjoyed it?
I enjoyed all of it. Mostly the relationships, I guess. It'd be hard to argue against the '96 football team and the 1997 baseball team. Just to share that experience of going to state with the guys that you grew up with is something that doesn't happen, especially in this town very often. So I think that would be, if you held me down, I'd say those are the 2 best experiences. I've really enjoyed playing amateur baseball. I still enjoy playing. This will probably be my 21st year of playing with the Bears. I've met people through baseball that, much like anybody's passion, I mean, everybody has a passion in life, and you meet people through that passion, but I've met some great people through baseball. It's fun to go up to the state tournament every year and rub elbows with guys like Tink Larson, who is, in the state of Minnesota, as well known in the baseball community as anyone. To talk to Tim Laudner and those guys, just standing watching an amateur baseball game, and it's fun to see people. It's fun that people know you also through that baseball. So amateur baseball and those relationships. I've played baseball with Rich Burr for 21 years now, and that's a relationship that I never would have had because he graduated in 1990. I graduated in 1997. I didn't know him until I played ball. Lee Hawks, Gene's son. I never would have known Lee if I went to play Bears baseball. So those are probably, through baseball, that's probably the most fun part that I've had. So, any other questions? Mike?
I know you volunteered quite a bit with the high school teams and stuff. What wisdom do you impart to those young kids as they're coming through?
Probably number one is accountability. That work hard, accountability. I've been the assistant varsity coach now since 2012, and it just so happened, and this is just weird coincidence, Bucky was the assistant coach my senior year. He was about 33 years old. I was the assistant coach, and we went to state. In 2012, I was 33, and we went to state, kind of the same setup, and Bucky's son was a senior. So it was kind of a special thing to share with him. But I work primarily with the pitchers. I do a lot of camps. I coach youth stuff. I was telling somebody the other day, everybody kind of finds their happy place, that place where you go and time doesn't exist and everything else is blocked out. For me, that's coaching. I love coaching, and it doesn't matter what level. I love coaching. I mean, I coached, although fourth grade boys basketball, I did not play basketball. I can motivate, I can organize, but coaching basketball is a hard thing for me. I coached fourth grade boys basketball this year. That was a little more difficult than coaching baseball, but it was fun. And I think what we try to talk about is working hard to accomplish things as a team, caring about your teammates, being a good teammate, and then being accountable for your actions. And that's not always easy to do now. I mean, for you school teachers, remember back in the day when you could do some things. Now with kids, they're a little more sensitive. But I think the one thing that I've learned about coaching kids is if you care, they respect you. And by holding them accountable, I think they might not like it at the time, but 3-4 years down the road, they look back and they think, boy, you know what? He cared. He held me accountable. I didn't like it at the time, but that's just the way it is. And I'm glad he held me accountable. So, yeah.
Practice starts Monday. How's the Bombers and the Bears going to be this year?
It's a good question. From the Bombers' perspective, we lost some really good athletes. Tanner Carlson was our shortstop, great shortstop. He was able to come in and relief pitch. He was our leadoff hitter. We'll miss his athletic ability, and we'll miss his leadership. Chase Reber will plug into that role, and I think Chase is one of the hardest working kids and a great athlete, and I think he'll fill that role really good as a junior. Hopefully he continues to make those strides to fill Tanner's shoes. Pitching, we lost our two studs. We lost Hunter Renardi and we lost Michael Munson, both seniors. So every year since I've been here, we've had two seniors that have been pretty good pitchers. Hopefully we'll have three this year. Max Bowen will be a good pitcher. If anybody knows Joe Bowen, it's his son. Andrew Egge, and then Reese Boyle-Holman are three guys that we're going to rely on the mound. Now this year in the state high school, they have some pitching guidelines where you have to take a kid out at a certain pitch count. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays in. Certainly pitching depth will be a bigger deal than it has been over the past few years because you can't run a kid up to 120 pitches anymore. Bears, I resigned as manager 2 years ago, so Ryan Britnall, Bubba, is the manager now. I'm still the president of the Bears, so I still am involved. It'll be interesting. We have a lot of kids, when you're 18, 20 years old and there's so many other things to do, cabins, girlfriends, Lollapalooza, all those concerts that they want to go to, sometimes getting a kid to commit to a summer of baseball is difficult. I'm excited about Brock Peterson. If anybody knows Brock, Ross's son, a tremendous athlete. He's playing baseball down at Gustavus. Great kid, loves baseball. He reminds me a lot of myself. He'll show up every day. There's a few kids that we kind of have that they want to be there once or twice a week maybe, and they kind of skip out on some things. So hopefully we can get a good core group of guys, but we should have 25 guys. So even if guys miss, we'll be able to fill that in. So I'm standing between you and corned beef and cabbage, so it's not happy hour, but it's corned beef and cabbage. Although maybe we have green beer, I don't know. Well, I appreciate your time, and hopefully you learned something about me. It's kind of hard to talk about yourself, and I haven't done it in a long time, but hopefully I didn't bore you. Hopefully you learned one thing, and thanks a lot. I appreciate it.